Okay, great, Tim. I'm very excited to have you. To everyone watching right now, my name is Savannah Hernandez with Action 7 News, and I'm here with my good friend Tim Enlow. Now, Tim, I was going to have this big fancy intro for you, but I figured it'd be better if you introduced yourself. So, talk to our viewers about who you are, what some of your experiences in, and today's topic is defund the police, this big defund the police movement, especially since here in Austin, Texas, where we are currently at, our police have been defunded by a third, 150 million. So before we get into that, who are you, Tim? Tell us about your experience.
Okay, thanks for having me on today. This is a really important topic to me as a former law enforcement officer. A lot of my friends are still here in the business in Austin and around the country. And so I think this is a very important, probably one of the most important topics in our country as of right now. My name's Tim. I am a former Austin police officer. I was with the Austin Police Department for right around 7 years. Did some time with the Bexar County Sheriff's Department in San Antonio before that. And after Austin became a federal agent with the Air Marshal Service. Total probably right around 12 years active law enforcement, another 12 years in the security profession.
Wow, so you are kind of an expert in this field. You're definitely the person we want to be talking to about this issue. Tim, you and I were talking to you before the camera started rolling, before we turned the mics on, about like this whole defund the police movement. And basically what I want to do with today's podcast is talk to people who are pro defund the police, people who really hate the police right now. A lot of people think that the police are unnecessary. And if you Google, what do the police do on average for the citizens every single day, it's kind of hard to figure out what they do. I mean, you can use common sense, but if you're a leftist person or a Democrat person who's constantly fed that the police are bad and all they do is brutalize citizens, it's kind of hard to think anything different. So before we really get into the defunding of the police, like, why do we need police to begin with? And what does the average day of a police officer look like? What are some of the things that they do that the average citizen knows nothing about or even takes advantage of?
Right. Well, I agree with you. First of all, I think that a lot of people have the impression that police are either just riding around in their police cars, writing tickets all day, or the other extreme, which is when they're called to protest, that they just, start getting out the batons and the riot shields and just start wailing on people.
Right.
Those are kind of the two things, especially nowadays, that when you talk to people that don't really have a good grasp of what all the police do, that's kind of the image that they convey to you. So police officers obviously wear many different hats, and we have obviously a lot of different types of law enforcement agencies in this country. We have the city police, we have the county sheriff's departments, and then we have federal agents and federal agencies. So I can speak to you from a county perspective, from a city perspective, and then a little bit on the federal perspective if you're interested in that. But I think most people that picture police officer think of a city police officer or patrol officer.
Right. The guy that stops and gives you a ticket.
That's exactly right. Okay. That guy. So, and it's funny that you bring that up because, I don't know if I'm the best guy to talk about tickets, because I used to constantly get talked to by my sergeant for not writing enough tickets. But anyway, typically for most police officers, the way it works is they go through a fairly lengthy academy, depending on where you go. Nowadays, a lot of the academies are 6 to 8 months long, right? Mm-hmm. After that, they'll come out. They'll have to spend at least another 2 to 3 months riding with what's called a field training officer before they are allowed to get out on the street in their own car by themselves and start law enforcement duties. So especially in the beginning career of a patrol officer wears many different hats, right? Mm-hmm. So they have to answer 911 calls that come in, mm-hmm. right? So if a citizen calls, and those 911 calls span a terrifically wide spectrum. It could be someone having a heart attack, and even though you would associate that with going to EMS, the call does go to EMS, but depending on where that neighborhood is or what's going on, a lot of times they will send police out there to assist, what they call assist EMS. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not necessarily assisting in the medical function, but they're assisting in keeping the EMS personnel safe.
And you know
Right.
what I've heard too, which I didn't even know, but since these riots started, because we've seen a lot of the protesters blocking police out of areas. Remember that Chaz Chop zone? They were blocking
Right.
police from entering, and the paramedics then in turn weren't able to enter. I had no idea that
Yes.
before paramedics could enter, the police had to be on scene first.
Yes. Many jurisdictions have that requirement that EMS or even fire will not respond to certain calls unless police are there first.
Yeah.
Right. And that's for the safety of those personnel. Now, so again, so you have medical calls, you have just about any kind of reason that a citizen would call 911, from an accident having occurred, someone being lost, a person having some kind of mental episode, what we call emotionally disturbed persons, to your more type of calls that you would see, let's say, in a lot of TV shows, whether it be robberies, thefts,
Hmm.
bank robberies, you name it. The patrol officer responds to any 911 generated call, basically. And so they have to wear a lot of different hats. If they respond to an emotionally disturbed person call, they have to bring out their skills that they were taught in the academy, how to properly deal with emotionally disturbed persons. Um, you
And when you
know,
say emotionally disturbed, do you mean like suicidal? What are we talking about
yeah,
here?
absolutely. It can be anything from schizophrenia to suicidal to, and nowadays, especially with so many homeless people on the street, many of them are mentally ill or have mental health issues,
Hmm.
and they're not receiving treatment for those issues. And so, more times than not, the police are the first ones to be called to deal with any kind of disturbances involving those people,
Right.
whether those disturbances involve violence or whether those disturbances just involve citizens being concerned for that homeless person. Right.
And I'm glad that we are talking about this specific subject too, about, mentally, I guess, disabled, or, how did you phrase it? You said they're
Emotionally disturbed.
emotionally disturbed.
Yes.
There we go. People here in the city, because so, let's take Austin, Texas, for example. Every single city, every single police precinct across the nation has different budgets, different city councils. They're all dealing with these things different ways. But here in Austin, we had a $440 million budget for APD prior to getting the 1/3 cut from our city council. A lot of people argued, okay, well, why do the police need $440 million? Why don't we reinvest that into the community, into helping out people who are emotionally distressed, getting them help? What would your response to that type of argument be? Is taking money away from the police the right move?
Well, first off, the big answer to that is no, absolutely not. And there's many reasons for that. When you cut a police department's budget by 1/3, which is
Hmm.
what just happened a few days ago here in Austin, you make the city more unsafe. There's simply no way to get around that. Now, the current trend is for politicians to sell that as no, we're making the city more safe because we're investing in some of these other services.
Right.
But the fact is, I would challenge you or anyone to drive around Austin today and go to a lot of these homeless camps, these
Hmm.
homeless shelters, right?
Yeah.
Document, get a rough head count of how many people do you think, just the ones you're seeing, not even the ones in the woods and camping on the Greenbelt, just the ones that are all along I-35, Riverside, Ben White, 183, where we literally have, thousands of homeless people camping under bridges and everything else, right? And I would encourage anyone to drive over the next week, look at these camps, and then a year from now, when supposedly all that money that was taken from APD and was reallocated to the homeless, to see how much of a difference you'll see of homeless people being on the streets. And I can pretty much guarantee you that you will not only see, you won't see less, you're going to go see more. Okay.
Hmm.
And I base that on many things. We have homeless facilities here in Austin. The fact is that more often than not, a lot of the homeless don't want to stay or reside in those shelters because
Right.
those shelters have rules.
Hmm.
For example, no drug use, right? A lot of the homeless people in Austin are addicted to drugs. That's just a fact. Okay. And so you can sit there and spend $1 billion on making more shelters available to the homeless. A big percentage of them won't use them. Okay. Because they don't want to be told what to do, because they have mental health issues, because they have narcotics addictions, for many reasons. And so, it's kind of one of those things. If a large part of the homeless population could function within normal societal rules, it wouldn't be homeless to begin with.
And I want to ask too, you're making these statements out of experience, right? Like these are
Absolutely.
some of the things that you've experienced working
Personally.
here in
Absolutely.
Austin.
In
You've worked in a couple other cities around Texas as well as a police officer. You were here in APD for 7 years, right?
That's correct.
Right. So, okay, let's get into the defunding part now too. There are people in the streets here in Austin celebrating the fact that we defunded APD by a third. You and I were talking about how APD was actually already severely defunded or not funded well enough prior to this cut. So talk to us, prior to this cut, what did APD look like and what were they lacking in basically?
Well, and it's not, again, when we're talking about APD, it's important, I think, for people to understand that APD is a microcosm of what's going on around the country,
Right.
as you mentioned earlier in the show, right? So I think that the things we say about APD, you could probably apply to the majority of police departments across the country at this time,
Mhm.
right? And that is that most of them always have to make hard choices based on the budget that they're authorized by the cities under which they serve, right? So at APD, for example, as of last week, there were 195 sworn officer vacancies at APD as of last week. Okay.
And why are there vacancies?
Well,
What does that mean?
Vacancies meaning attrition. People retire.
Mhm.
There's not enough cadet classes being run. Even before this defunding, there were not enough cadet classes being run to bring new officers in to fill and make up the gap for officers who were either retired or let go, or they decided to move on to other agencies. There's always attrition, as is in all jobs, right?
Right.
And so that's why usually there's a continuous kind of cycle of people go and new people come in, and people go and new people come in. Except here in Austin, over the last few years, there's been a delay in a lot of the academy classes. And so, again, some of that was based on funding. Some of it was based on the city felt there were not enough minority candidates that were being recruited to fill those academies. And so slowly but surely, APD started losing the war on filling those vacancies, right? On trying to get those vacancies filled. So last week they were at 195 vacancies, sworn vacancies. And
that means that as of last week, we were short almost 200 police officers.
Almost 200 police officers.
That we need to properly police our streets.
And that's
our
correct.
people.
Yes.
For our population size, or what is that based on?
Right. Well, yeah. So generally, if you look at police departments around the country, a lot of police departments kind of try to maintain a ratio of, I believe it's, and don't hold me to this, I want to say 2.5 officers per 100 people or something like that, right?
Okay.
Again, don't hold me to that exact number, but I think that's somewhere close. But and basically APD was already behind the curve on that, right? And now, more alarmingly, within the next month, we have 400 more officers coming up eligible for retirement.
400.
400 more officers that are going to be eligible to retire. Many of them have indicated that they will retire. In the past, you had to reach 23 years with the Austin Police Department in order to be eligible to retire. Most officers chose to stay past that 23 years, and the city would offer incentives for them to do so. Extra retirement benefits, different things like that. That's all pretty much fallen by the wayside now. Some of those incentives have gone away. And then when you look at the hostility that many police officers are currently experiencing, they've just decided that it's not worth it anymore. And so a lot of them are putting in their papers as soon as they reach that 23-year mark.
See, and that's my question too. Like, we see so much hostility towards police officers. There's people in the streets protesting them, telling them, FTP, ACAB, look up what a lot of those things mean. It's not nice. There's so much hate directed towards police. They're being attacked. They're constantly running into the line of fire. People don't seem to really appreciate them. I mean, so we had these incentive programs so that people would want to become police officers, and now we're taking those away too.
We're taking those away, and it's like the perfect storm right now. I'm 54 years old, and I in my lifetime have never seen any kind of combination of factors that have made it so difficult for people to be police officers as currently exist right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredibly tough time. I don't even know how some of these guys are getting up every day and putting on their boots and gun and still coming to work, because it just, the odds against them right now seem so overwhelming that, you really can't blame them for wanting to find a different career or wanting to retire early.
Mm-hmm. And okay, going back to my original question too, why does APD need 440 million? You said that there was 193 vacancies. We're already 193 short. You kind of talked about how those had to do with a couple other factors, just, making it really hard for police to even become police at this point.
Right.
But why do we need 440 million? Why can't we take half of that and reinvest it into our youth to make this utopia type city?
So, well, first and foremost, because I think that 400 million, that wasn't even adequate.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I know people.
But why wasn't it adequate?
Well, because let's look at some of it. Let's look at it from the leftist or from the protesters' point of view. Right. Let's look at some of their complaints that they have against police. Right. Let's look at police brutality. Let's just start right there. Right.
Okay.
Too many shootings of supposedly unarmed minority Americans. Right.
Or minorities being targeted specifically.
Right.
By police
I've heard
officers.
everything from black men are being hunted by the police in this country to, some really outlandish statements that have been made that when you break it down and look at the statistics, any intelligent person would know that's absolute hogwash. There's no way that's happening. But so when we look at police brutality, let's just start right there. Right. A lot of times, if there is a questionable shooting, okay, we can look at what kind of training did that department provide.
Mm-hmm.
And across the country, more often than not, especially once officers are out of the academy, there is very little in-service training provided for these officers. Why? Because there's no budget for it. There's just, the money's not there. Right? They can't afford for cops not to be on the street because they don't have enough cops to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So taking those cops off the street to send them to a week-long training or two-week-long training, it just doesn't happen, right? Most cops are lucky if they get 3, 4, 5 days of in-service training per year. Now, when we're talking about skills such as defensive tactics, how to defend yourself with your hands, when we're talking about your firearms skills, when we're talking about keeping up on your knowledge of the latest mental health techniques on how to deal with emotionally disturbed persons, all these different things, there's already not enough money and not enough time to continually train these officers after they're out of the academy. So now you take money away so that there's going to be even less training. There's going to be even less focus on those critical things. You're going to have the exact opposite happen of what the progressives are hoping will happen. And that is you're going to have more use of force cases, more deadly shootings, because police officers are going to be less well trained and they're going to have less practice. And so I think, when me and my friends who are still active, I still have a lot of friends that are active on the force. When we look at these videos on TV sometimes where you see officers, resorting to a taser, resorting to firing their handgun, a lot of times when we look at those videos, in not all cases, but in some of them, the ones we see, those of us who've been in police work, we recognize, okay, look, that officer right there was probably not confident in his hands only defensive tactic skills,
Hmm.
right? Well, why isn't he confident in those skills? Well, because the last time he was trained or put them to use or had any kind of amount of practice with them was in the academy 8 years ago.
Right.
And now he's just been hopping 911 call to 911 call for 8 years on patrol with very little in-service training, definitely very little in-service training in defensive tactics. And yet now he's finding himself in a very dangerous situation. And so, he resorts to using his handgun, or he resorts immediately to using a taser. So the idea that less money is going to fix what the people are currently complaining about is so backwards it can't even be described.
So we have had that argument, defund the police. We've also had the argument, let's completely abolish the police, basically, because they are saying, okay, well, police officers aren't skilled. They're shooting people in the street. They're killing people, blah, blah, blah. Say what you will. So, I mean, do you agree with that argument then? Should we abolish the police? Like, what needs to happen at this point if we do have unskilled police officers in the street and they're unskilled because they're defunded severely and there's not enough of them? I mean, like, what happens at this point? What do we need to do?
Well, the short answer would be George Zimmerman. That'd be the short answer. You're going to have
Citizen police shooting people.
See what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
and again, and I say that in jest, obviously, right? A little bit of satire there, but this is what amazes me when you have these conversations with some of these people who are saying, let's get rid of police or let's severely cut the police. Well, wait a minute. You were outraged when a private citizen felt the need to follow someone, right, that they thought was suspicious, and whatever happened that night wound up killing that teenager. Whether you think it was justified, whether you think it wasn't justified, doesn't matter. One of the biggest complaints that I heard was at that time from Democrats or socialists or progressive was he wasn't a cop. That wasn't his job, right?
Right.
Yet now we're talking about, oh, let's go ahead and cut the police. Well, what do you think is going to happen?
And you know what? You're completely right with that too, because we just had the death of Garrett Foster here in Austin.
Another prime example.
And Garrett Foster, he had his rifle there. He aimed it at a citizen who had a gun. He's practicing his Second Amendment. He ended up dying because that citizen wielded his gun.
Right.
And I mean, that's what happened. So, I mean, let's take the police off the streets for a week. Let's abolish police for a week. What does America look like to you?
Like Portland or Seattle during Chaz, anarchy, arson, assaults, people getting pulled out of their cars, as we're already seeing at these protests, people taking over the interstates, just complete anarchy. And that's not far-fetched. We've seen that already. We've seen proof of that in every city. Minneapolis, let's start with Ferguson, because that's really where BLM got their start. Black Lives Matter, right? Ferguson was like their war cry. So let's look at Ferguson, right? Police were told to stand down, right? And immediately the riot started. Businesses were burned. Police station was attacked. I mean, then we can move forward, whether you're looking at St. Louis or whether you're looking at Minneapolis, where the police were actually told, hey, it's not worth defending the police station, pull out. What happened? The police station was burned to the ground.
And that was another question I had for you too, because right now in Portland, so basically this past weekend, we saw that video that's going super viral of this guy in his truck. BLM pulled him out. They beat him to a pulp in the street.
That's correct.
He's still in the hospital. Hopefully he'll be recovering from those injuries. But, we have BLM now just attacking private citizens, causing them to crash their cars, pulling them out of their cars. People on Twitter are really upset with the Portland police for not doing anything, not being there, not, enforcing that law and order. So what would your response to that be? I mean, who's to blame for this type of activity that's happening in Portland, Seattle, New York, Austin?
Well, again, it's important for people to understand, and I'm sure most listeners do, but again, maybe some people don't really follow how it all works. But the bottom line is police departments don't operate independently. They are under the control of the local government, right? For which they, are hired under, funded under, and everything else. So Their orders, any police chief's orders typically come from either the city manager or the mayor or a combination of the two or the city council, right? So if police don't act, it's very, very rare that those orders came from the police chief. More often than not, those orders come straight from the mayor or the city manager or the city council, right? And that's what we're seeing in Portland, right? Portland has a very progressive mayor. They have a, you could argue, progressive governor, even in the state.
Right.
And so, and they have made it clear that they don't want the police getting involved, and that it's their position that all these demonstrators are just simply expressing their First Amendment rights and yada, yada. But we know that's not true. We know there's violence involved. Any intelligent person who watches this knows there's riots involved. And so not only are they telling the police to stand down, but they're taking tools away from the police to manage these situations. They're taking tear gas away. They're taking rubber impact munitions away, or bean bags away, and all these different things. Austin
And before we jump off of tear gas too, I always hear the argument of tear gas is even outlawed in war. Why are we using it against our citizens?
Yeah.
Talk to us. What's your response to that?
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. CS gas is used all the time, and I'm not sure what wars these people, are referring to. But we've used tear gas. The United States has used tear gas. Every other country has used tear gas. There's a lot of things in the Geneva Convention that people talk about what, again, should be done, but the reality on the ground is different, right? And I don't think a lot of citizens understand is that if, let's say, they see a police officer use pepper spray on somebody, they're like, oh, look at that mean police officer using pepper spray. First of all, I can guarantee you that police officer himself has been pepper sprayed, because it's part of their training, right? They have to get pepper sprayed themselves. Every course that I ever attended that had any kind of chemical agents involved, I had to be exposed to those chemical agents, right?
And why do they do that?
So that the police officers do understand the effects that those munitions or those agents have. One, they want to prove to them, look, these are not lethal. Okay. They also want to teach them how best to employ them. Right. Example, just a real rough example. You don't want to throw that tear gas canister when the wind is blowing in your direction, because then guess what? Now you just gassed all your police officers, right? So to get police officers to understand that, they have them deploy those agents in training. And they also use it so that police officers are trained in how to decontaminate people, that have been exposed. So like I said, I don't know how many times, dozens upon dozens of times that I've been exposed to chemical agents. So these police officers don't use these munitions just willy-nilly, right? They know the effects these munitions have, and they use them when necessary, right? And obviously, you can look at any of these situations, whether Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, before any of those agents are ever deployed, there is always some kind of warning given to the crowd.
Tim, you know what is so crazy to me is there's this video from Portland, and the cop gave them, I think, 7 warnings. He said, this is your 7th warning that we are about to disperse tear gas. And then the media the next day, tear gas dispersed on innocent protesters. And, too, we keep seeing the media putting out these pictures of police like about to hit people with batons. They look super violent. And it's like this small cropped in photo of, let's say 12 police officers. And then there's like a whole mob behind them of people throwing things at them that we're not seeing, attacking them that we're not seeing. And then it's like this small cropped in photo of like these 12 cops trying to hold back this mob, basically.
Absolutely. But, that's been a problem with media for, since the early days, where we're talking, you can go back to
Rodney King.
Rodney King. Even, no, I would say way before that. The picture that always comes to my mind as far as context and things like that is during the Vietnam War, you had that famous picture, I forgot the photographer's name, but where a South Vietnamese officer is executing a Viet Cong prisoner in a public street in Saigon, sticks the revolver up to his head, and the photographer caught it right as the gun is going off, right? And that was a Pulitzer Prize-winning photo. It circulated the world, and it had a huge impact on the policy and the public opinion as far as turning against the Vietnam War,
Mhm.
because they were like, look, these are people we're supporting over there. These Vietnamese who are executing these poor, helpless prisoners in the street, right? And it wasn't until years later that the full context came out, which was that prisoner was the leader of an execution squad that had been leading his men throughout Saigon and executing any kind of professional teacher, any person that was deemed to be a threat to the communist government later on.
Yeah.
They were going and executing, including relatives and friends of the South Vietnamese colonel who this guy had executed. Right now, we're not saying that justifies it, but his men had been fighting to take Saigon back for like 48 hours straight. They've been in 48 hours straight combat. They were exhausted, and then they bring this leader of this execution squad to them and tell them, about the bodies they found and everything else that these men had executed. And he made the decision right then and there that, to execute him on the spot for what he had done. But again, that context was never explained in the newspaper, right?
Right.
And like you mentioned, Rodney King, same thing, right? At first, they only showed a very small portion of the videotape, as we see so often even today, that they only show a very small portion of the police body cam, usually the most.
Yeah, let's talk about George Floyd. I mean,
exactly, right?
We saw that the body cam footage actually finally came out, 3 months into rioting, looting, killing people in the streets.
Right.
And if you actually watch that body cam footage, George Floyd asked himself to lie down on the ground. He was being uncooperative for like 10 minutes. I feel like the police were being actually really, really nice to him.
Right.
They were trying to help him out because he was having a panic attack. And, that's completely ignored. Where's all the media coverage on that? No one is circulating that video anymore.
And again, context. I saw people. So I saw two sides come out, right? I saw the side come out that says, look, see, now we finally see that he was not cooperating and that he wasn't doing what the police were asking him to do. But I saw the other side immediately come out and say, oh, my God, look, within 5 seconds, that officer pulls his gun as he's walking up to George's car and points his gun at him. How mean, how terrible. This poor man was having a panic attack and this cop was pointing his gun at him. Let's be clear. I've dealt with hundreds of people who have taken narcotics. George Floyd was not experiencing a panic attack. That's absolutely crazy. He was perhaps entering the stages of what we call excited delirium from narcotics use, from the fentanyl, methamphetamine, and THC that was in his system. But he refused over and over again to show his other hand to the police officer. And for the average civilian who may not understand how fast someone can shoot you, one of the big things we as police officers want to see when we walk up to cars, we want to see people's hands, because hands are what kill, right? Even today, I train my guys that, look, it's very rare somebody kills you with their big toe or their left ear or their nose, right? Hands, right? We need to see hands, okay? Because that's what kills, okay? So when we walk up to a vehicle, and especially when there's possibly been a felony committed or something like that, right? Obviously, that police officer first said, hey, knocked on the window, let me see your hands.
Yeah.
And George Floyd refused to show his hand, one of them. And so the officer had reason to believe that he may be reaching for something. So at that time, for his safety, he pulls out his gun, right? What people don't want to talk about is, as soon as George Floyd showed both his hands, the gun went away. Floyd acted like I've seen many people act when they're under the influence of narcotics. That's how he was acting. And so I think that always presents a problem. But again, for the average layperson, and I get it, the average layperson who's never had to fight someone on PCP or has never had to deal with anybody who's part of a fentanyl overdose or anything like that, right? They don't understand. They just, it's hard for them to fathom, well, why didn't they just sit him down and give him some water? Or, why? They don't understand. Why didn't
they call a therapist?
Exactly. Why don't we call a social worker to talk to him and all those good things, and we can go round and round about down the rabbit hole of George Floyd. But the bottom line is, again, that case is a microcosm for what police deal with 1 million times a year, all over the U.S.
And you know what? That's the thing, too, is I think a lot of people don't think about, if we get rid of the police, they're the ones that are going to have to deal with suicide calls, trying to talk somebody down from a suicide, someone who's, sitting on a ledge. Like, it would be a lot of pressure to try to talk somebody down from that situation. Or If you happen to come across a really bad car accident at night and there's someone who's cut in half there, you don't want to be the first person to walk up and deal with that. I mean, I wouldn't, because
Most
that
people
would be a
don't.
terrifying thing to
Sure.
have to experience and look at. And like, imagine having to walk up and be that first person, or imagine being the person who has to run into the line of fire when
Right.
a store is being robbed.
Right.
Like, people think that if we defund the police, crime is just going to stop
Right.
and we're all going to live in this big utopia.
No, I think those are valid points for sure. And, I've seen everything from we need to disarm the police, they shouldn't be carrying, we should make it more like, Europe and things like that. The funny part is
Where
that,
everyone gets stabbed.
yeah, but and the truth of it though is that Europe isn't a utopia that everybody makes it out to be. First of all, I lived in Germany for 13 years. I traveled all over Europe. And the fact is that today in 2020, more police officers in Europe are armed than ever before.
Really?
Than ever before. Absolutely.
With guns, with what?
absolutely. So the British police, until maybe prior to 9/11, right, had very few armed police officers. After 9/11, they had to sit there and create all these armed police response teams, right, to back up those unarmed officers, because too many unarmed officers were getting hurt or couldn't manage the situation that they were dealing with, which is
Right.
terrorism, stabbing violence, all these different things, right? So it's absolutely crazy. But again, if you talk to the average American over here that believes in defunding the police or disarming the police or getting rid of the police, they don't know those things. Why? Very few of them have traveled outside the U.S. Very few of them have actually sat down with a police officer in Sweden or a police officer in Germany. Or, I always laugh when they talk about, oh, we should be more like European police. Again, I grew up in Germany during the 1970s when we had the RAF, the Red Army faction. We had the Baader Meinhof gang, all these communist and Marxist oriented terrorist groups. And let me tell you something. Police officers were patrolling all over Germany in pairs, with one guy having an MP5 submachine gun, both officers having pistols, and one of them always having a German Shepherd, right? That was trained to attack. Okay. And that was everywhere. Airports, train stations, downtown into shopping areas. You would see them everywhere, right? So this idea, again, that Europe is somehow more refined in their police response. And I've seen much more heavy-handed tactics by European police than I ever have by American police.
Very interesting. So getting back to here in Austin, Texas, $150 million cut from APD. What does that look like going forward? Since I moved here, I've been here for about a little bit over 2 years. And when I first got here, we didn't have as much homelessness in the streets as we do. We didn't have now the defunding of the police. When I first got here, this was a beautiful city. And over the past 2 years, I've watched Mayor Adler pass different laws and ordinances like public camping, which have led to a severe rise in crime here in the city.
Absolutely.
Women do not feel comfortable walking downtown alone. People come and visit Austin. They get attacked. They don't want to come back.
Right.
So now that on top of, the open camping, homeless ordinance, now we have this defunding the police ordinance or law, I guess, that's getting pushed through. I mean, what's Austin going to look like? What's happening now?
Well, let's look at where the cuts are being made, right? And then that can kind of give us a projection for the future. And I think that's the easiest way to project. So let's talk with the complaint that progressives had for years here in Austin: not enough minority officers in the Austin Police Department, right? So over the years, Austin had, in each academy class, was successfully recruiting more and more minority officers, right? This year, this academy class was going to be the first majority minority cadet class in Austin, right?
And they defunded it.
And they defunded it
Yeah.
and said, this year's cadet class is canceled. Now, to get that many qualified minority candidates, these APD recruiters had to recruit from all over the United States, right? They sent out letters of employment offers, right, to these people. A lot of these people moved from out of state to Austin because they'd already been given an academy start date. And then the mayor and city council literally just pulled the rug out from under these people after they had moved to Austin said, oh, we changed our mind. No cadet class. Sorry.
So we're now literally taking jobs away from the minority community.
That's exactly what they did. This was going to be the first majority minority cadet class in Austin PD's history since the 1800s, and they canceled the class. So again, how does this further their aim to have a more diverse police department? It doesn't. Right. So then let's look at the next thing, right? Complaints about officer conduct, whether we're talking about, the force they used during the demonstrations or shooting Mike Ramos or, some of the more controversial cases we've had here in Austin. Well, guess what the other department is they want to cut now, or that they have cut with this funding? APD's Internal Affairs Unit. Huge cut to APD Internal Affairs Unit. Well, that unit is tasked with investigating misconduct by police officers. Okay. So now we are defunding the very unit that is tasked with investigating police officer misconduct. How in any normal sense of reality, how does that make sense? It doesn't.
So people want more accountability for police officers. So we're now defunding the department, holding police officers accountable.
That's exactly right.
Gotcha. Okay. Right. I'm just trying to follow along with the mentality, the thought process.
Because I think by the time we're done, good luck with that, because I literally can't follow.
So far we have we've taken jobs away from minorities.
Yes.
And we are defunding the police area, or the department in the police precinct responsible for holding police accountable.
That's exactly right.
Okay, continue.
Okay, so next thing, 911 call center, right? Because now we're slashing the budget of the 911 call center. So there was already complaints about police response times, right? About how police respond to some of these calls based on the information that they're given from 911, all these different things. So again, now we're defunding the 911 call center. How is that going to improve public safety?
Right.
It's not.
And that's such a big argument too for people who are like very pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, is your gun's going to be there before the police are.
Yes, absolutely.
And I mean, I guess now here in Austin especially, we're cutting the 911 department or that area, and it's going to be an even longer time before police can respond to us.
Next thing, in their all-knowing wisdom, they decided to cut the forensics unit because, hey, DNA, rape kits.
Yeah, I was about to say, isn't that rape kits?
It covers, forensics obviously covers a lot, okay? But, the promise is, well, yeah, we're slashing their budget and we're taking it away from APD, but we're going to somehow reinvent it and give that responsibility to some yet unknown entity that's floating around out there in the universe somewhere, right? Listen, those departments took years to be built into the professional standards, accountability departments that they are. And now we're literally going to destroy all that and start from scratch. That's not going to be, that's not a recipe for success. It's a recipe for disaster.
Wow. So those are some of the cuts that we're making.
Along with mounted patrol. No secret there, right? Mayor Adler, the city council, got a lot of pressure from the activists from Antifa, Black Lives Matters, and others to defund the mounted patrol unit.
And what was their argument to defund that?
Well, first of all, for citizens that don't know, when we're talking about mounted patrol, we're talking about officers that work in the downtown entertainment district on horseback, right? And they were some of the most effective tools that the PD had for crowd control and to keep things under control on, really busy weekends or holidays or special events and things like that.
The horses can kind of get
The horses are very effective in managing crowds. And because they were so effective, especially in these last demonstrations, there was a huge outcry from, the Antifa and BLM types. And so again, the city council said, yeah, you're right. That's just mean using horses. So let's just go ahead and cut their budget. Right. The list goes on, but it's frightening that public safety has been compromised to an extent here in Austin that I have never seen in my lifetime. I've been here in Austin since 1981. I've never seen a plan so well crafted to make the city so unsafe.
So, what does the average day for an American or an Austin citizen look like then? I mean, we are going to have slow response times to
Sure.
911 calls. Are there going to be less police patrolling the streets, do you think? We're not going to have those horse police downtown anymore? What, I mean, do you think there's going to be a rise in crime? Like, what do you foresee happening now that we have this huge cut?
Well, okay, and you're gonna hear different viewpoints on this. One of the people I'm most disappointed in right now is the Austin Police Chief Brian Manley.
Hmm.
He seems intent for whatever reason to not stand up to the mayor or the city council, and he keeps trying to sell this this pill that everybody knows is going to make people more sick, and he's trying to sell it as if it's somehow going to heal the city. Um, it's a shame because he came from within the ranks of APD, and he was one of the first chiefs in a very long time who had come from within the ranks of APD. Usually the city would always hire from outside. But, his position is that I read about in the news here over the last few days is, patrol is going to be our priority to make sure that patrol is fully staffed. So citizens shouldn't worry. We're still going to be there for them. And to that, I have just one thing to say. Bullshit. I don't know if I can say that. Okay, bull crap. We'll say that. Because any cop who's been down at APD for any length of time knows that patrol has never been fully staffed, ever.
Hmm.
It just never happens, right?
Yeah.
You have sick people, you have sick officers that call in sick. You have officers on vacation. You have officers on suspension. You have officers, who have left, and again, there's been no replacement for them, right? So, for a police chief to stand up and say, "Oh, don't worry, patrol will still be fully staffed." Patrol has never ever been fully staffed in Austin. Okay, so let's get that out the way right away. He's lying about that. So then we come to now with these budget cuts. What you're seeing is a shell game, right? We talked about Mayor Adler too has come out and said, no. In January 2021, our promise to the citizen is that there will be no sworn vacancies of law enforcement personnel at APD.
Hmm.
What he's not telling the citizens is the reason there's not going to be any unfilled position is because with these budget cuts, they have agreed and voted on to cut all the current vacant positions and just eliminate them so that they just don't exist anymore.
So they're still needed, but
Well,
we're
they're
just
needed,
we're getting rid of them
but they got rid of. So on
Yeah.
paper, it shows, okay, yeah, look, we don't have any vacancies. Well, yeah, but if you cut 300 positions from APD, right? And right now they're saying, it's going to be 100 that are cut. Either way, somebody's lying, because if there's 195 vacancies and you're cutting 100, and so that still leaves 95 vacancies, not counting the people that are getting ready to retire and the normal attrition, right? So really what we're looking at, if we're honest about our numbers, is that by 2021, we're probably looking at around 350 to 400 vacancies at APD.
Because we were talking about this too before we started rolling, but there's almost 400 officers now here at APD coming up on retirement.
That's exactly right. Right.
So we're
Plus
about to
the
just
normal
have
attrition.
a bunch of vacancies,
Sure.
defunded department,
Absolutely. Right.
no incentive to become a police officer right now.
Absolutely.
Well, sounds like this is going to be a fun city for criminals.
For criminals,
Yeah.
and for those who wish to use this situation for political gain, the mayhem, right?
Yeah.
To use it for political gain. And it's a shame because this was a vibrant, beautiful city that people from all over the country wanted to move to. Almost every year for the last decade, Austin was always listed in one magazine or another, one newspaper or another, in the top 5 cities to live in the U.S. I promise you, it's going to be a long time before you see Austin in the top 5 cities that people should live in anywhere.
Yeah, it honestly looks more and more like LA every single day with
Every
the
single day.
homelessness, with again, it baffles me how people want to vote in Democrats into office. And I feel like it's because they have never lived under a Democrat, I guess. I don't know, or maybe they haven't, they just like the policy. But I've personally seen like you said, this was such a vibrant and beautiful city. And I think that's what it is, Tim. It's they come into the city when it's already messed up. So that's all they know and they don't know any better. But
Right.
I've seen Austin when it's been better, when it's
Right.
been vibrant
Right.
before our mayor messed it up.
Right.
And it's such a sad thing to see. Okay, Tim, well, let's wrap it up. And we'll just say, what's your message to people who want to defund the police?
Well, first of all, you're being very short-sighted. Nothing good is going to come out of this. Whatever you think is going to come out of this, I promise you, it's going to be the opposite. Because one thing they told me in the academy in 1995, I went to the Austin Police Academy, and I'll never forget this. An instructor stood in front of the classroom, and he said, you guys are all excited to be new police officers and everything else. He's like, but let me just give you a little bit of wisdom from somebody who's been in law enforcement for, I guess he was there maybe 25 years at the time. He said, law enforcement in this country, anywhere, in any city, is always like a pendulum, right? And it kind of mirrors what's going on in society, right? And sometimes that pendulum swings all the way left, and sometimes it swings all the way right. Very rarely does that pendulum ever stop in the middle. And, at that time, he was telling us that because of the war on drugs and crack in Austin at the time, that the pendulum was kind of to the far right, that there was a lot of support, a lot of money coming in for law enforcement. Hey, get this city under control, get the drugs under control, get the violence under control, right? And there was huge public support for the police at the time, right? And we did. We went out and we got the city under control, and we got, large areas of town that were lawless and had lots of stabbings, shootings, violence, rapes. We got all that under control. And then as soon as that got under control, right, then the need kind of went away, right? And so then people started voting in more progressive, more liberal politicians, right, who now only looked at the money aspect, right? Oh, look, it's safe in Austin. Well, let's invest all this money, and more businesses started coming in. And so you got a much more liberal base that started growing in Austin.
And, I feel like this so much, too, with a lot of liberal people is they call to defund the police because they've never had to call the police themselves because they already live in a safe city because of the police.
Right. And that's exactly right. And so now the pendulum has swung all the way left, right? And so now we don't need the police. We can do it without the police and everything else. So in wrapping up, my prediction is going to be that pendulum is not going to stop at the left. It's going to swing far back to the right again.
So you think it's just going to be like escalating violence, right?
Oh, absolutely. The violence will go up. Drugs will go up. Carjackings, all the stuff we had gotten a pretty good lid on in this city, and that made this city so nice to live in again. All that will return. And once it reaches a fever pitch, then you will see, once it actually starts affecting, like you said, the people who've never had to call 911 before, right? Now, when it's their daughter being raped, now when it's their child who's addicted to heroin and out committing robberies, now when all these things are happening, then all of a sudden it's like, where are the police? Yeah. Why are there no police, right? And then all of a sudden, now the pendulum swings back to the right. And so all these progressives and liberals and socialists who thought, look, we've won. We moved that pendulum all the way to the left. We've proven we don't need police.
Yeah.
All you're doing is setting the stage for law enforcement to come back stronger, bigger than ever before down the road, because nobody wants to live in fear or wants their family to live in fear.
But then that's the big circle, because once you guys come back in, clean it up, it's going to go back.
And that's what the instructor told me. He said funny. It will always be that way.
So we're just living in the shit show era of everything right now. Everyone just had it so good that we now get to experience defunding the police.
That's exactly right. And people are going to have to button the hatches and look out for each other. And hopefully, like I said, we'll weather the storm. We will weather it because we're strong people. Americans, Texans especially, we're strong people. We're going to weather the storm. And but I do think there will be a price to pay for the politicians who created the storm. And that price is coming, and maybe sooner than they think.
Hey, well, thank you for sitting down here and talking with us. I think this was very informative, and I'm glad we were able to kind of discuss some of the issues that you wouldn't normally be able to find on Google and, research there. So thank you for sitting with us, Tim.
Had a great time.
And hopefully we can sit down and talk again, because I'm sure there's going to be massive rioting and looting coming up to November 3rd. So,
I agree.
all right. Thanks,
Stay
Tim.
safe.